Welcome back to Mr. DuPage's class. Today's lesson is for my CP Algebra 1 classes. It is the 2.4 distribution lesson. Let's get into the lesson.
Alright, please make sure that you put the date in the top right hand corner. This will help you keep your notes organized. What I want you to do first is go ahead and try the warm-up. You should give yourself about 2 minutes, so please pause the video now. Try the warm-up for about 2 minutes, and then as soon as you're done, please turn the video back on. Let's see how you did here. Number 1, 14 greater than D. Remember, when it's greater than, that means we're making it larger, so it's going to be addition. Than tells us we need to switch the order, so it will be D plus 14. Okay, let's look at number 2, the quotients of 2 times x and 7. Well, the first part of this is 2 times x. So what is 2 times x? It's just 2x. Then quotient tells us that we're going to have division, so it'll be 2x divided by 7. Or you could write this as 2x over 7. That means exactly the same thing. Please don't forget to box your answers. Okay, let's look at number 3. Right here, all we're doing is combining like terms. So the first number we run into is 4y to the third. Do I have any other y to the thirds there? No, I do not. So it would be 4y to the third. The next thing I run into is the negative 9y squared. That will work with the positive 12y squared. So negative 9y squared plus 12y squared would be positive 3y squared. The last thing we see is negative y and positive y. Well, what is negative 1 plus 1? It's just going to be 0. So I really do not have to even use those. My final answer would be 4y cubed plus 3y squared. Number 4, again, we're just combining like terms. The first thing we run into is a negative 4a. We're going to combine that with the positive 5a. So what's negative 4 plus 5? Well, it's going to be positive 1. I could write that as 1a, or you could just write that as a. Next thing I run into, on this one you may want to cross some things out. The positive 10b and the positive b. Well, I have 10b plus b. That's going to be plus 11b. Last thing is the negative 9c. That's going to combine with the negative 4c. So negative 9 minus 4 would be negative 13c. Now everything else is not like terms, so we are done right there. Let's look at number 5. I have a negative times a negative. If I have a negative times a negative, that's just going to turn to a positive. So 4 times 5 is going to be equal to positive 20. Okay. 6, it's negative 3x plus 5. You need to look at this as combining like terms. The first thing I run into is the negative 3x. Is there an x to combine with it? No, there's not. So we just write down negative 3x. Next thing I run into is the positive 5. Are there any numbers there that do not have a variable? No, there's not. So I can just write plus 5. Technically, that is already simplified. You could write that as well. Number 7, I have a positive 8 times a negative 3. Well, 8 times negative 3, or a positive times a negative, is going to get me a negative. So 8 times negative 3 would be negative 24. The last thing, I have negative 2 times negative 5 times negative 10 times negative 1. I'm just going to multiply the first two together first to see what I'm going to get. Well, it's a negative times a negative, so we know it's going to be a positive. 2 times 5 is 10. I can then multiply and just look at these two on their own. Negative 10 times negative 1. Again, a negative times a negative is a positive. 10 times 1 is 10. So 10 times 10 is 100. You could also just do all those on one line if you would like. What does multiplying by negative 1 actually do? If I multiply anything by a negative, what it's going to do is change my sign. Anytime I multiply by a negative, it will change the sign. Hopefully you did pretty well there. If you still have questions, please make sure you ask. Oops. Some things you may or may not know about exponents. If I have inside a parenthesis negative 3 squared squared, that is going to equal positive 9. The reason behind that is that's really saying it's negative 3 times negative 3. And as we've talked about a couple times, a negative times a negative will give us a positive. What about negative 3 squared, but there are no parentheses? That's really going to be negative 9. The reason behind that is the negative is not attached to the 3. So it is not getting squared. There are a couple different ways you can look at that over here to the right. The negative can be in a parenthesis by itself because it's really the negative times the 3. Or if you look at the bottom there, the bottom row, we have a negative 1 in parentheses. That is the same thing as just that negative. So you need to be really careful when you are using an exponent on a number that has a negative. If the negative is not inside the parentheses, you're not actually squaring it or cubing it or taking it to whatever power. All right, so let's go ahead and I'm going to have you try the next 4 here. Give yourself about a minute to try those. Pause the video right now and get to work. All right, let's see how you did. What I'm actually doing here is I'm going to evaluate each one of these expressions for the number it tells me. So x equals 5. All I'm going to do is take 5, plug it in for x. So x was being squared, so now my 5 is squared. That will give me 25. In number 2, I have a negative. I put the 5 in for the x and I square it. Remember what we just talked about up here. If the negative is not inside a parenthesis, I can either take the negative in a parenthesis and then just square the 5, or you just have to think about the fact that the negative is not attached to that 5. So what's going to happen here is this would be negative 25. Okay? Here, this is going to be a little bit different. This could be a little tricky for you. Since x is negative 7, and x is what's getting squared, how we want to write this is actually parenthesis negative 7 squared. What that really means is I'm taking negative 7 times negative 7, which would get me a positive 49. Okay? 4, we're going to do the same thing here. I'm going to put a parenthesis around my negative 7 because that is what has gone in for the x. But there is still a negative out front. So you still need to have the negative out front because that is part of our problem. So really what's happening here is I have negative 7 times negative 7, which is negative times 49, which would get me negative 49. Okay? Distributive property. This property is perfectly named. Distribute the term on the outside to all of the terms on the inside. Arrows are helpful at the beginning. I'll show you what that means in 1 second. Guys, this is probably the most important thing that we're going to learn in the entire first quarter. This is going to come back over and over and over in your entire math life. Okay? What is talking about with arrows? If we look right here, with our a times b plus c, what it means is I'm going to take a and multiply it by b. I'm going to take a and multiply it by c. That are the arrows. That's what the arrows are talking about. It gets a little easier when you're actually using numbers to understand that, and you'll see that with our examples down below. That is actually the same as b plus c times a. You could take that a and bring it out to the front, and then we're still just using our arrows. And it's AB plus AC. Just like it says here, I like to rewrite my expression with the number out in front of the parenthesis. It's just the way my mind works. You guys do not have to, but it would be helpful to keep things organized. So let's go ahead and look at these 3 examples. I'm going to have 3 times the 5x and 3 times the 2. So I'm going to look at the 3 times the 5x first. What is 3 times 5? Well, 3 times 5 is 15, and I'm just going to bring the x along. The next thing I want to look at is 3 times 2. Well, 3 times 2 is 6. It was a positive 3 and a positive 2, so it's going to be a positive 6. Make sure that we are boxing our answers. Looking at number 2, remember that a negative, or something that's in front of an exponent, there's just a negative in front of an exponent, no, I'm sorry, not an exponent, a variable, I apologize. If there is just a negative in front of a variable, Remember how we can always put a 1 in there. Same thing holds true when there's just a negative in front of a parenthesis like this. I can actually make that a negative 1, so I'm going to distribute the negative 1. So it'll be negative 1 times 10x and negative 1 times negative 3. Well, what is negative 1 times 10x? It is negative 10x. What is negative 1 times negative 3? That is a negative times a negative, so it ends up being a positive 3. Okay, let's look at number 3. Oh, I have 3x times 5x plus 2. All right, so I'm going to take the 3x times the 5x. Let's just look at that by itself first. What this really means is I have 3 times x times 5 times x. Okay, remember when we were talking about exponents, x squared really was the same thing as x times x, right? Well, if you look down here, I have x times x. So how this is going to work is I'm going to take the 3 times the 5. That will give me 15. Then I'm going to take the x times the x, which is then x squared. And then I can just write them all together. That means the same thing as multiplication. The next thing, I cannot forget about my 3x times my 2. So what is 3x times 2? Well, it is plus 6x. All right, let's go ahead and move on to the back. Let's look at number 4. I have a negative 2 times the quantity 3y plus 7. Well, negative 2 times 3y. What's negative 2 times 3y? It's negative 6y. Then I have negative 2 times 7. And what's negative 2 times 7? It would be negative 14. Here, number 5, this is one of those situations where you may want to rewrite the problem. If you want to rewrite the problem like I'm going to, I would make this 4x minus 6y plus 9. Now it'll be 6 times 4x. What's 6 times 4x? 24x. Then it'll be 6 times negative 6y, which is negative 36y. Then it's 6 times 9, which is positive 54. Okay? You just need to take what's outside the parenthesis and multiply it by everything inside the parenthesis one time, and you'll be okay. Now, here we're back to the words, and it's telling us to do something. So we want to write the expression first that is telling us to write. When it says the quantity, what that really means is we're going to use parentheses for everything that comes behind the word or behind the phrase the quantity. So after the quantity it says x minus 4. I'm going to go ahead and put parentheses around the x minus 4. Then it tells us we need to multiply that by 5. All we have to do that is put a 5 in front of the parenthesis. Now we're distributing. So 5 times x is 5x. 5 times negative 4 is negative 20. I want you guys to go ahead and try 7, 8, and 9 on your own. Give yourself a little bit of time. Go ahead and pause the video until you're done. As soon as you get done, go ahead and turn the video back on, and we'll go through it together. All right, let's look at number 7, see how you guys did. Again, this is one of those problems where I may want to rewrite the problem so that my number that I'm going to distribute is out front. The number I want to distribute is the negative 3. So I can write this as negative 3 times negative 2x plus 9. I do want to put parentheses around that just so I know that that negative is attached to the 3. So I'm going to take negative 3 times negative 2x. Well, what is negative 3 times negative 2x? A negative times a negative is a positive. 3 times 2 is 6, and the x just comes with it. Then I have negative 3 times 9. What is negative 3 times 9? A negative times a positive is a negative, so it would be negative 27. Okay, let's look at number 8. We're going to take 3 times 2x first, then 3 times 5x after. 3 times 2x is 6x. 3 times 5x would be 15x. Be careful, you're not done there. What do I have? What can I do? Well, I have like terms. 6x and 15x are like terms. Every time that you get done with the problem, you should check this. I have 6x. Is there another x on the board? Yes, there is. It's 15x. So 6x plus 15x is 21x. You are not done until you try to combine like terms. Every time you distribute, try to combine like terms. We have another one of these problems that says the quantity. Remember that that's going to have parentheses with everything that comes after the term the quantity. So now we have 8 plus m. I'm going to write that first. 8 plus m. Put that in parentheses. It says the product. So that means it's multiplication. I can just put a 10 in front of the parenthesis. I'm going to take the 10 times the 8. That would give me 80. I want to take 10 times the m. That would get me 10m. Now remember when we were talking about standard form, we want to write this in descending order. The 10m has a variable. That means that it's a higher up the food chain kind of situation. So it's actually going to be larger for the descending order portion of what we were talking about with standard form. So it would be 10m plus 80 to write it in standard form. That will come in handy much later. Just get used to doing it now. Okay? Let's look at the more complex distributions. Still, just follow the same rules and you'll be okay. Follow your order of operations as well. If there's just a negative in front of the parentheses, what can I put in between? Well, a 1. I have negative 1 now to distribute. So negative 1 times negative 3 would get me positive 3x. Then I have the negative 1 times the positive 7. It would get me a negative 7. All right. Let's look at number 2. I need to take the x times the 5x squared. Well, remember, if I have variables with exponents, what this is actually doing is I'm going to take 5 times x squared times x. Well, x squared is really x times x. So I really have 5 times x times x times x. How many x's do I have here? I have 3. So I can actually write that as 5x cubed. Okay? Then I'm going to take the x times the 2x. It's following the same rules that the same process that we just talked about with the 5x squared times x. X times x would actually be what? X squared. So it would be plus 2x squared. Finally, x times negative 1 would get me a negative x. Okay? Let's look at number 3. Remember order of operations. If you follow order of operations, you cannot go wrong. Okay? The first thing we want to do is simplify what's inside of our grouping symbols. Well, there's nothing that I can do with x and negative 10. The next thing I want to do is multiplication or division. Well, 2 being attached to the parenthesis really means multiplication. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to bring down my 4 and my positive sign. Okay? I'm going to take the 2 times the x. That would get me 2x. I'm going to take the 2 times the negative 10. A positive times a negative is going to be a negative, so negative 20. And then I just need to bring down my negative 5x. Just like I said on problem number 8 above, we now need to combine like terms. The first thing I run into is this 4. Is there another number that does not have a variable? Yes, it's negative 20. 4 minus 20 will be negative 16. Next thing is the positive 2x and the negative 5x. Okay? The positive 2x minus 5x would get me negative 3x. And remember, like we talked about on problem number 9 above, we want to put whatever has the variable in front. So to be negative 3x minus 16. Just get used to writing things in standard form. Number 4, this looks a little strange. But remember what I talked about on number 1 above? Okay? I want you to go ahead and try numbers 4, 5, and 6. There's a little trickiness on number 6 right here. Make sure you know what you're doing with that. So go ahead and pause the video now and try them. All right, number 4. When there's a negative just in front of the parenthesis, we know we can put a 1 in there. I want to work inside the parenthesis first if possible. Well, 2x and 5 will not combine. So we're going to move to multiplication and division. the negative 1 times 2x. Make sure you bring down your 6 first. Negative 1 times 2x would be negative 2x. Negative 1 times 5 would be negative 5. Can I combine like terms? That's the next thing you need to ask yourself. Well, I can. This 6 and the negative 5 can be combined. What is 6 minus 5? It is 1. Then I have minus 2x. Now the negative with this 2x right now, that is saying that the 2x is negative. So when I rewrite this into standard form, I have to write it as negative 2x plus 1. So be careful there as well. Number 5, we want to try anything inside the parenthesis first. Nothing to do there, so I'm going to do my multiplication. 2x times x would be 2x squared. 2x times 2 would be positive 4x. And I just bring down my negative 3x. There is a negative on that on the back side of my parentheses here. The only time that the negative will affect my parentheses is when it's in front by itself, not when it's behind by itself, like in this problem. Okay, so be careful there as well. Well, 2x squared, can I combine that with anything? No, I can't, so I'm just going to bring it down. 4x minus 3x would get me positive 1x, and there's my answer. All right, remember I said there's something tricky with number 6. Let's see what we can do here. I'm going to rewrite my problem. I have a negative 2 out front. So what I'm going to do is plus, keep the parentheses around the negative 2. So I know that the negative will come with it. And then I have 5x minus 4. I'm going to take the negative 2 times the 5x. So I have 17x. Negative 2 times 5x would be negative 10x. Then I'll have the negative 2 times the negative 4, which would be a positive 8. Now I can combine like terms. The 17x and the negative 10x will combine to get me 7x. The 8, there's no other number without a variable, so I'm just going to bring it down. And there we are.
All right, that concludes our lesson. The most important things to remember from this lesson is when will I have my negative be raised to a power? It's only when it's in parentheses. Okay, if it's outside of a parenthesis or there are no parentheses and the number is being raised to a power, we will not have the negative be involved. Also with distribution, whatever's outside the parenthesis will multiply by everything inside the parenthesis. That's very, very important to remember. Also remember how to write in standard form. It's going to be from the largest exponent to the smallest exponent and in alphabetical order. All right, well, have a great day.